Well, welcome everyone. My name's Karen Griffith-Graga, and I'm Chief Investment Officer for Dream It. Welcome to our inaugural Dream It Athena discussion for 2016. And joining us is Robin Albin. Robin is a brand expert, and I'm going to let her give her background in a minute. But basically, we're going to talk today about how do you turn a blank page into a beloved brand? And here at Dream It, we often have this scenario where entrepreneurs think they know what a brand is or how to build a brand, when in actuality, they don't truly understand what it means to build a brand. So we're so happy to have Robin with us to help guide us along this way. So Robin, can you give us a quick overview of your background?
So nice to have you all here today. As Karen said, my name is Robin Albin, and I'm currently SVP of Conceptual Innovation at Estee Lauder. But prior to this, I had my own branding and advertising agency, and over the years, I've built a lot of brands from a blank page, working with entrepreneurs like yourselves. Sometimes they had parameters, sometimes they had an idea, sometimes they just had an insight to an audience, and we started totally from a blank page. I've also spent a lot of time over the years taking mature brands and giving them back their mojo, giving them a little revitalization. And when you have a brand that has a really strong DNA, sometimes they go off the tracks, so it's easy when you have that kind of DNA to put your brand back on the tracks. So that's why it's critical from the very inception of a brand to build these strong foundational building blocks so that the brand has a lifespan, that it's sustainable, and it has longevity.
So Robin, I'd love to hear just briefly, what are some of your favorite brands today? And then we can dive into what a brand is, and then you can circle back as to why these are your favorite brands.
Okay, so one of my favorite brands today is Airbnb, because I think they have captured not only the insight of the times, this desire to have a sense of humanity and a sense of connectedness, but they also have an incredible business model that they've built off of that insight. A lot of times you have a brand that will have an insight and then they never can translate it to a business. It just becomes an idea that lives in the brand's heart, but it doesn't become executed. So I think what Airbnb has done with their bello, their logo, their sense of belonging, their sense of advertising, they've been very, very courageous. They've created a culture. They give back in terms of creating, like when Hurricane Sandy came, they reached out to their Airbnb participants and said, can you put people up? You know, and they got a terrific response. So these are all the things that come together, both an insight, an idea, a story, and a culture. And I think those are the things we'll talk about during the course of this conversation. Those are the critical pillars to every brand.
Okay, so can you repeat that list again so everybody has that top of mind as we go through?
So you need to have a consumer insight. You need to really be listening to the times. What's on people's radar? What's happening that you can either solve for or make easier for them, but something that is not even so much a pain point, but a tension point for people. And once you can identify that, then you can zone in and have an idea. And I always like to pick a one-word idea, because I think that is a way of grounding you. And after I go through this list, I'll give you another example. The next thing is to be able to have a great story. And that story can come from the idea or from the founder or from an experience, but you want to create a storytelling piece, because people don't remember facts or benefits. They do remember stories. And then you need to have a culture, because no matter how great your insight is, no matter how articulate your idea is, no matter how powerful your story is, if your culture does not live and breathe every aspect of that, if everyone from your CEO to your founder to your sales force doesn't believe the same exact thing, then your brand falls apart.
Okay.
So, give you another example. One of the brands that I'm most recognized for helping to create is Origins, which was created from a blank piece of paper by the Estee Lauder Corporation over 25 years ago. And a lot of people think that Origins was created to be a natural brand, but really that was a representative execution of, oh, look who's here. Hi, Brielle. That was a way of executing the idea. Estee Lauder at the time, the Skunkworks team that was working on Origins, originally identified the fact that the consumer was in a tremendous state of frustration. They felt that they were very, very disrespected by both companies and, now I'm getting an echo, by companies, and it was just the dawning of the computer age. So they felt like there was this sense of big brother that was, it was a time of excess and a time of, just all of this excessiveness. And so the consumer felt very, very diminished. So the idea that was the insight, the idea that we came up with was respect. And so as a beauty brand that was going to be about respect, that was our one word, we said that there are certain things that you must do in order to execute that word. And so what we decided first and foremost as a skincare brand is if we were going to be about respect, we were going to respect a woman's skin. And at the time there was a lot of conversation about high-tech ingredients and new scientific formulations, but with those went a lot of suspicion and, again, types of fear. One day you'd open up the paper and an ingredient would be the greatest thing since sliced bread. The next day it was carcinogenic. So we wanted to go back to what we knew was tried and true, and that's how we got to nature. We said that if you are going to be respecting a woman's skin, you're not going to put harsh chemicals on it. So where are you going to source it from? So we went to nature. If we were going to be about respect and we were taking from nature, we had to give back to nature. And that's how we became environmental stewards. We also believed at the time that women were the best representatives. They knew their skin better than anybody else. And so rather than being an expert who told women what to do, we said, if we're going to respect her, we're going to respect her intelligence and her insight. So we're going to give her lots of information and help her make a decision that was right for her, because given the information, she was perfectly capable. She didn't need us to tell her what to do. So we respected her intelligence. In doing that, by respecting her intelligence and knowing that we were going to be giving her a lot of information, we knew that if you start lecturing people, they don't really listen to you. So we created a language that was in vernacular, that was lighthearted and fun, that made you smile, so that you could absorb all the information. We also said that at the time it was in the mid-'80s, and it was a time of Reaganomics, where it was the US was very, very empowered. And we said, well, it's not my way or the highway. There are other cultures around the world, and we should respect history and tradition and look to those other cultures for insights that they might share with us. If we were going to be about respect, we also wanted to respect a woman's pocketbook. So we didn't overpackage. We had plain white packaging. We put our money into our formulas. And so you see, by just taking one word, we could develop an entire story around a brand. And the culture was so deep that we didn't even need to tell people how to behave. They were so on board that there was a certain attitude that took place in the office where everybody just knew what Origins was about. That, to me, is a perfect scenario for how you create a brand.
So let's roll back a little bit. So, we have a group of founders and entrepreneurs. Where do they start thinking about a brand, their brand?
They start first and foremost with their consumer. I think a lot of times what happens, and it happens in mature brands and it happens with startup brands, where you fall so in love with your technology and your product that you forget to say, does anybody need this? Does anybody want this? What role is it going to play in their lives? So you have to start with the consumer. And that was something that Steve Jobs did so well. He knew what was going on in he said that you don't start with the technology, you start with the consumer. So you want to listen very, very carefully, and you want to be sure that what you're doing is relevant for the times, is going to fit in someone's lifestyle, is going to have a meaningful relationship with the consumer. So you start first and foremost there.
Okay, so joining us is Brielle, who is a Dream at Athena alumni and also co-founder of Oneka Farms with their product Root. So Brielle, can you give us kind of a brief framework? You and Robin have been working together on building the Root brand. And, give us a brief overview of kind of how you thought about things before working with Robin and how you think about the Root brand today.
Okay. Apologies for hopping on a bit late, first of all, but thanks for having me. I guess I'll start by kind of introducing the product and what we're doing. So like Karen said, I was a Dream It alum, and Root is our first product. It's a smart indoor gardening system, a 30-inch tall planter that allows you to grow a variety of flowers, herbs, and leafy greens in your home pretty seamlessly. And how we started was really, I think, we really tapped into the consumer space. My partner and I had originally met at Penn's Integrated Product Design Program, which is pretty unique because it's a interdisciplinary program between the business school, the design school, and the School of Engineering. So from the get-go, we really took a systems thinking approach to finding issues in larger ecosystems and really honing in to find solutions through products and better ways to help consumers. So we actually started there, like with a problem, and the problem was that people are disconnected from their land and their food sources and all the plants. The plants, like Robin was talking about, origins that have this power that we can utilize for good. So we really started attacking it that way and looking at product solutions, and through the technology found that apologies, I'm losing my voice, people in the consumer space actually needed this. It wasn't just something that was needed in industrial agriculture, special lighting and all these really cool techie things for plants. It's actually something that's quite desired by people. As we went around, we really talked to people. And I think that's super important because we really did want to verify if someone actually would want this weird planter in their house. But it turns out that I would say like pretty much everyone, I actually can't even think of one instance where this didn't happen. But whenever you go up to someone and say, hey, would you ever want to grow? They say yes. And then they say, but I don't have time. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the space and I don't have expertise. So we found that there was like an innate want and desire. And I think that's really where the brand like essence and idea started, that everyone really wants to grow. They want to be surrounded by plants. And we kind of thought about the science behind that, this biophilia hypothesis that all people innately gravitate towards the natural world, and that's what makes them happy. So I think like the like basis of it really stemmed from that. But through going through the I would say product development process, you get so honed in on what you're actually accomplishing, the technology, and you come across things, especially in hardware and IoT, that you never thought you were going to come across, and things sometimes take much longer than you might have anticipated. So it really, what you might think will be 2 months of product development can easily turn into much longer than that. And so you really kind of get tied down to the day-to-day logistics. And then obviously you come back and realize, oh, wait, I have to sell this thing. There's sales involved. So how we first started working with Robin was really jumping back into why we started this. And I think the roots, no pun intended, of how Eric and I came together and realized that we really wanted to help people and improve their lives through the use of these gardening products. So I think what was really great about working with Robin was we had so much, like we literally gave her pages of information of all of our thoughts and our story, and from back in our childhood, like how we were introduced to gardening, how we were so interested in how Eric and I came together as partners to kind of, we were very passionate about our mission. And but sometimes it's really difficult for you as the individual, surprisingly, to fully disclose that story in a way that's meaningful, because their information might be scattered, or it might not seem coherent at the time. And when you've worked on something for so long, it's somewhat difficult sometimes to step back and say, oh wait, why am I doing this? How did I get here? So with Robin, we really, she almost like interviewed us actually. And I feel like when you work in groups and brainstorm, you think of things you just couldn't think of if you hadn't been in that group. And I think by being interviewed, we really were pulling out key elements. I was almost like, oh, yeah, I forgot that's what I was thinking at the time, and put together, the real picture and story of how we came to be. And I guess that's one thing. I don't know if I'm going to, well, that's kind of the background. I feel like I have a little bit more to say on it. I don't know how we're going to.
Well, I'd love to get Robin's perspective, right? If you don't mind. Robin, when you first met with Brielle and Eric and Root, what did you see from a brand perspective, and where have you brought it to today?
Well, they had gotten as Brielle just said, they had gotten very, very tied into the technology. They had started off with an insight, and then through all of the production hiccups and things along the way, they had really moved off of their idea and had moved into this technology space of worrying about how it was going to come to life versus what it was about to begin with. So we really went back and dissected the brand and looked at a lot of things the brand could be. And as Brielle said, we talked a lot. And what we uncovered really was that the name Root, which they had selected, had a lot of meaning and a lot of relevance and a lot of metaphor, great storytelling about what they were doing and what was important to them, because they were very interested in bringing families together, and those are our roots. They were interested in a new way forward, which is uprooting old ideas and creating a new route as a pathway. And they were also very optimistic and celebratory and wanting to do something really good. So then they were rooting for people, giving them a chance to be cheerleaded on. So we took the word root and we really looked at all the many meanings and definitions and came to the conclusion that that was their story. That was their word that they could execute off of, and there was a lot of storytelling that they could do coming off of that. So we went back and we put the emotion and the insight back into the brand. It was always there, as I said at the outset. When you have an insight and you have an idea, sometimes you fall off the tracks, but if you have those elements, it's easy to put the train back on the tracks, and that's what they had. So that's what we did, is we basically went back to the roots of the brand, pardon the pun, and reinstalled the things that made them passionate about this path in the first place.
And so that insight is that inherently all people want to grow something, and that by growing something, it makes you happy and more connected to kind of nature and the earth, and that's a fundamental need of people. Is that the insight?
Yes, pretty much. I think that, there is also this desire right now for a healthier lifestyle. People are questioning what's in their food sources, and Brielle feels very passionate about this, as does Eric. And to be able to say, this is trusted. I know what I have in my home is organic, is well taken care of, is the freshest it can possibly be, has high nutritional value, so that I can feel really good about what I'm serving my family or myself. And there are also lots of things that you can grow, right? Lots of things that we can grow with this system. So that also, that diversity and that versatility of it is really appealing to an audience now.
When you're in a startup, sometimes, it might just be you and another founder. It might just be you. It might be a team of 3. And because of that, when you are really in the product development phase, it gets really tough to sometimes just keep telling that story and step back, but it really is a priority. And I think people have to realize that, because in reality, if you think about it, any major corporation, if they really wanted to, could could possibly, maybe replicate something you're working on, but your story is what differentiates you. Like, no one is going to buy your product because it was made by some giant conglomerate. They're really buying it because it came from you. It came from this person with this story. And if your audience agrees with that, which, your first fans, of course, they're going to be your fans. That's what they're buying. They're buying you. They're buying your vision, and they believe in you. And I think your brand story in that essence is what you believe. And you have to be very honest and passionate about that. If you kind of wash it, or even if you kind of, in sustainability, we call it greenwashing, when maybe packaging has like some green tones on it and it says it's kind of like all natural, they're not really being true to themselves or true to their brand. I feel like in the future, if something goes wrong, that can really attack and bite back at you. But if you really stay true to your roots and you're very honest with your audience, I think that no 30 million, 100 billion, whatever dollar company can really stop you from that.
And you shouldn't be afraid that you're not for everyone. Because your loyal customers are going to be super loyal. You can't be all things to all people. And
I think that's what we were afraid of.
What young brands try to do is create a very, very broad swath and say, well, we're going to do this for this one and that one. And you wind up being nothing. You can't be afraid to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we believe in. And if you believe what we believe, come on along, because that's where your loyalty really comes through. That's where your transparency and your honesty, and that's where people connect with your brand. And if they don't, that's fine too. But you need to have a voice and a vision that's truly yours, because as Brielle said, a lot of times what happens in corporate America is that there are incremental innovations, there are incremental brands that are just a little bit better than this one, a little bit better. And if it's just about the product and it's not about the purpose and the vision of the founder and the brand, there will always be another product that will come along that you'll trade off for. But once you have an affinity and allegiance for another brand, you might dabble, but you'll always come back.
So I want to dive into that storytelling aspect, but there's two things real quick before that. One, I want to point out, when we're talking consumer here, it's the consumption of whatever you're providing. And so all this applies to a business-to-business type brand as well. This isn't, all that we're talking about is not consumer specific.
There's always a consumer, whether it's business to business, it may be another
Correct.
business. Your consumer may be your VC.
Right.
Anyone that looks and develops a relationship with your brand is a potential customer.
Right. So, in talking about this, you can't be all things to all people. That's a really important point. The fine line is, for an early stage entrepreneur trying to figure out product market fit, how do you marry kind of this product market fit concept with your story and not being all things to all people, right? Because it's a balance.
Well, your story is your passion. It's your authenticity. Another brand that I like to reference when I'm teaching is James Bond, because there is a brand. Okay, this character, this storytelling has been alive and been relevant to audiences for over 50 years. And over the course of that time, James Bond has evolved. His toys and all of his gadgets and all of his storytelling have evolved. He's gone from having playmates to partners in terms of his relationships with women. But each one of those elements that are part of the Bond story, whether it's the gadgets, the villains, the sequence of events that happens, the opening sequence, the whole Bond song that's always exists. Each one of those things, it's called a leitmotif, actually. And what it is it's the code that surrounds the brand. And it's what gives you this sense of integrity. So you always want to find some things that ground the brand, that are always part of the brand language, and whether that's a visual language or a verbal language. And I think that those are the kind of things, no matter whether you're talking a business to business or you're talking a B2C, those are the things that are going to establish your brand as here to stay. Does
Could you give us, could you give us some examples of the language, whether it's visual or verbal,
Well,
around a brand?
again, from the James Bond point of view, which I really, really like as an example, because everybody knows James Bond. Everybody knows that over and over again, he's got villains, he's got gadgets, he's got the Bond car, he's got the Bond girls. They're always they're different in each scenario, but they are always there. Another brand that I really, really like that I think does an amazing job is Harley Davidson. They're the promise of freedom. And you always have, the open road. You always have the irreverent language. You always have the strident personality. It's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to become a motorcyclist, but you could admire the brand and you could look at the brand and say, that brand is consistent over its many, many years. It always speaks the same. It always has that sense of, pardon my French, fuck you. I'm about freedom. I'm busting loose. I'm not eating peanuts squished into a seat of an airplane. I'm out on the open road. It's this promise of independence that's appealing to generation after generation.
So Brielle, could you talk for a few minutes about kind of how you got your mind around this product market fit versus telling the story of Root?
Okay. I think sometimes actually when you're in a startup, you get sucked into VC think, which a lot of times means selling thousands. It's all about business model, right? So, and scalability is a huge part of that. So I think when you have initial conversations coming out and you're going through fundraising, when it becomes all about numbers, it almost in a way, in a sense, it almost dictates what you think the product market mix is going to be, because you might start going in the mindset where, oh, well, I might have to make X amount of dollars, and if I need to make that amount of dollars to stay afloat or to get to V2 of my product, that means that I'm going to have to be in this type of retail chain or distribution. Well, if that's Walmart because it dictates volume, is that fitting to my brand? They kind of actually fit, and it's like a puzzle piece. It kind of all goes hand in hand. When in reality, I think I kind of actually have had this realization probably only in the last few months. It's always there and it's obvious, but it really becomes obvious when you get really excited about your brand. And like with this rebranding, I'm like super pumped. Robin knows I send her thank you notes all the time, just getting more and more excited as we launch. But, for a startup, maybe like putting 8,000 products out in the market at, let's say, Target might not even make sense out of the get-go, because, if you haven't really finagled and figured out every little technicality and you don't understand that consumer yet, you might just fail on the shelf. So I think it comes back down to, okay, product market mix. Maybe my product will fit in Target one day, but I really first have to work with those early adopters and those first consumers and really listen to them and see what they need, because they're kind of like the first group that's going to dictate maybe what the rest of those 8,000 people may need or want and see. But they're going to be the best people to help you. It's almost like, I feel like your first 50, 100, 200 customers, they're probably going to be the guys who are going to literally get you to the next step. And instead of thinking big from the get-go, you almost have to think small and cater to those specific people. So for me, my mix, right, the product mix is the product mix is kind of another story, but the core essence and audience that I want to reach out to are people who have just found us. Like, we haven't even marketed it really yet. They have just literally found us, and they are 100% big fans. We actually don't even have all of our product information on the internet yet, and there's people who have already ordered multiples and who are asking us millions of questions, and that's an amazing feeling, actually. I know if I just kind of threw it out in a store, I'm not sure that would happen. So I feel like baby steps are kind of part of that search.
And we talked a lot. Am I on?
Yeah.
We talked a lot about where Root wanted to be distributed and what the ramifications are. I'm a big believer in exploring the black swans. I've been bitten in the butt on a few brands when things that you didn't expect to crop up conversations that people have about your brand you didn't anticipate. So if you ask a lot of those questions early on and you're really, really disciplined with yourself, you're not going to avoid every single mishap, but you certainly can predict with good accuracy some things that might or might not happen. So we talked a lot about this distribution and where routes should be initially. And we thought, maybe there is a potential to what Brielle just said, being in Target and not necessarily even making it on the shelf, winding up on the floor, kicked around, and we talked at great length about that. Or going on QVC, what does that mean? Who's that audience? How reliable will they be? And I think that those are very, very important, hard questions to ask yourself as you start to navigate through your audience and your sense of distribution and your product life cycle and how it's going to launch, what's the next stage of it, where does it go from there, and how does it grow? I think you have to also really be able to say, is there an obstacle I'm putting in my way now that's going to prevent growth? Where do I want to be? What do I see the potential? Even if those are, imaginary goalposts that you're setting for yourself, if you decide that that's someplace you want to go, you should put it in early so that you don't make mistakes, that you don't wind up doing things that are going to prevent you. We talked a lot about, do you want to be a mass brand or do you want to be a prestige or semi-prestige brand? Because if you start off as a mass brand, your chances of getting to prestige are slimmer than if you start off as a prestige brand and then create a bridge brand or then create another brand underneath that. And we talked a lot about Calphalon or some of the all-clad. You can see that selling in a Williams-Sonoma at a very, very high price. Once they establish their credibility and their authority there, then they can do a line that could go to Kohl's, that could go to Target, but they couldn't have done that in reverse. They wouldn't have had the credibility. So those are the things that I think that you need to ask. And whether you're doing a B2B or a B2C brand, I think it's really, really good to decide what you want the brand to be in the future. One of the things I often ask founders when I start working with them is, what is your objective? Do you want to launch a product and then if it doesn't work, flip it around and then you'll go do something else and you're on to the next? Do you want to launch it with the objective of being able to sell it and then go do something else? Or do you want to build a brand that's here to stay? Because each one of those, that's not a judgment, but it definitely has a very different life cycle and approach.
So you talked earlier about storytelling. And in fact, we at Dream It agree with you 100% that everything is about storytelling, because that's how people engage. And people being either your end consumer or your investor or your board, it's all through kind of this storytelling that paints the vision and paints the journey. We've had storyteller trainers coming in to work with our entrepreneurs because it's that important. Give us your thoughts on, how do you really go about effectively storytelling? And
storytelling to me always starts from the personal. Why am I telling this story? Why do I think someone will care? I mean, even if you were going in to present to a VC, you would want to capture their attention. You would want to have them believe that what you're doing is a source of passion and that it has a future attached to it. Why should I invest in something that might not be here tomorrow, that doesn't have a soul to it? So I always think that the best way to start telling a story is to start with your personal story. And that's kind of where Eric and Brielle went back to finding their story. What got them here in the first place, how they connected, why they connected, and where they want to go, what they want to do. And I think that it's easy to tell a true story than it is to try and make up a false story.
And so how do you then translate from the personal into that vision, that journey?
I'm not quite sure that I understand your question. So if you are starting off with I'll give Apple as an example. So Apple's idea was to disrupt the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what they've launched, they are always consistent about disrupting the status quo. And by having an idea that's so broad, there's always a status quo that needs to be disrupted. But they tell that story in a lot of different ways, depending upon which specific product that they are selling or merchandising at the time. When they did iTunes, it was a different story and different campaign than when they did the Mac versus the PC. But it's always about thinking different, and it's always about making the connection. Do you want to be this kind of person? And they actually did tests to demonstrate that people who buy apples actually think different than people who buy PCs. That instantly that mindset helps, that affinity, that a sense of identity instantly makes them connect and be the person that they aspire to be. And they did it with people who are not necessarily creative, but they did some neuro testing on them and found that just by that identity with the brand itself changed their behavior. So that, I don't know if that, again, that answers the storytelling piece that you're asking, Karen, but I think that it all comes from an authentic idea that then is filtered through a personality, a guy like Steve Jobs, who was definitely an iconoclast and an independent thinker, and it created an affinity with who he was and what his story was, how he translated it to not just a product, but a series of products in a giant brand.
So, we've talked about these elements of purpose and passion, and how these are critical elements in a brand. How do you suggest kind of testing out the different formats of expression of that purpose and passion to really figure out what's the most effective given kind of your strategy and your target audience?
Well, for example, we lost Brielle, but yeah. Brielle and Eric, we looked at a lot of visuals, and we looked at a lot of great photography, a lot of plant photography, and tried out, is this you? Is that you? And where is the greatest connection? And we looked at some great photography of a fabulous couple photographers called Gentle and Hires, and their work is absolutely exquisite. And initially, Brielle and Eric loved the photography. And then as they started to live with it, they said, wait a second, this is just not us. This is just too formal. This is just too perfect. This is not the way we live. This is not who we are. So then we looked at some things that were very kitschy and lighthearted. And they were able to reject that right away. They said, we're very serious. This is not about being silly. We want to really grow things that are relevant. And then we wound up looking at lots of different expressions until they landed on a sense of imagery that they were able to say, that feels home, that feels right. So I think you need to look around and look at a lot of different resources and elements and say, what is it that I identify with? And the other thing is that you as founders are not art directors, you're not copywriters probably. And so what you want to do is align yourself with people who can help you express it so that it comes out the way you want it to, that it looks professional and it's not loving hands at home, but also that you have an opportunity to see lots of different visions other than what you might choose for yourself. It's kind of like trying on clothes. You want to put on different clothes and say, does this suit me? Is this my style? Does this express my brand? Because the other thing that we talked a lot about is the whole idea of archetypes. And, there are 12 different major archetypes when you're doing storytelling. So what type of archetype do you want to be? Do you want to be a brand that's caring? Or do you want to be a brand that's a hero brand that's going to solve people's problems? Do you want to be something that's very adventurous and an explorer brand? You know, that you could look at these 12 different archetypes and start to say, which does my story begin to identify with? These things are universal. They are the reason why we like a particular style of storytelling, a genre, over and over again. You know, is it a rom-com that you like, or do you like science fiction? All of these kind of things, because they are universal and they are deeply embedded in us, they help you tell the story. Are you a rebellious brand? Are you a brand about being a jester, making fun of things, being lighthearted, being silly? Those were some of the things that we tried on before we landed where we did with Root.
And where can the entrepreneurs learn about these 12 archetypes?
I'm happy to share them with you, but you can Google them right online. And, you know, there's great descriptions of them with even brands that are examples of them. I can send them to you, Karen, and you can share.
Okay.
The rest of the team. But they really, really will help you say, who are you? And Brielle and Eric and I talked a lot about who they wanted to be.
So there's one more area that I want to dive into before we wrap up, but I want to kind of go back and say, you know, these two core elements of purpose and passion. Often you hear people say with successful entrepreneurs, well, they didn't really care about money, or they didn't care about the fact that they were trying to build a humongous company, right? What they were trying to do was fulfill this purpose, and they did it with passion.
Right.
And that's really what all this is about, that we're talking about, is if you have that purpose and passion in building your company, you need to naturally drive your brand, drive your story, and then, you know, all the pieces will fall into place as far as the product offering and, you know, the different distribution channels and so forth.
And that goes to the last piece, the culture piece. You
want to where I wanted to go. So thank you.
So that's your culture piece. And that's where you decide what kind of inspired leader you want to be. Because ultimately, if you have passion and you have purpose, you're going to have followers, people who are, you know, that's what fandom's all about. That's why we gravitate towards certain celebrities, their brands as well. And so, you know, you identify with who they are, what their story is, and then you watch them and you become part of their group or their cult. And I think when you have this passion and then you have this purpose, people believe you, people get tied into, you know, they connect with you. And they want to be around you. That's where loyalty comes from. And ultimately, you're in a business. You want to make money. You want to be successful. And those are the elements that make people successful. You're not going to buy something that's going to disappoint you or let you down or not be there for you, or something that's anonymous. Do you hang out with people that, you know, don't interest you and intrigue you? I mean, you have to really think of your brand almost as a person. You have to anthropomorphize it so that it takes on the characters, the characteristics, the personas of things that are important to you and things you want to be around, because you can bet if you want to be around them, other people want to be around them. You know, that's part of the humanity and also the humility that a brand has to have. And that's what makes people attracted to it and attached to it, and that's ultimately where you're successful.
Well, it's interesting because I have a friend who's a lawyer, a litigator, who is very religious, you know, goes to church at least 5 times a week, but he's an avid Harley fan, right? Because that's tapping into the one aspect of his personality that's about freedom and about the open road. And he's not, you know, he's not tattooed, he's not pierced, he doesn't, you know, have that outward characteristics, but because of that purpose of, and the passion of, you know, going after that freedom aspect, the brand speaks to him as well.
Well, don't forget that the greatest brands in the world are religions. Those are the brands that have been around the longest time. And again, they have everything. They have an idea behind them. They tell great stories, right? They have a culture that says, you know, you live this certain way. These are our values. We all believe these values and we all sign on. So, you know, again, all of these things, whether it's a religion or a country or a tribe, those are all brands too that we want to identify with, that we want to associate with, that we feel I like them. They speak to me in an intimate way. So religion is definitely a very successful brand.
So thank you so much, Robin. We lost Brielle connectivity-wise. Do you have one or two words of advice that you'd like to wrap up with for the entrepreneurs?
Again, the two words that you use, Karen, I think are the most important. Have a passion and have a purpose. And if you do those things and you really adhere to those things, then you will connect. And that's the heart of a successful brand. But again, you know, when you're developing your brand, be sure that you're connecting to the consumer, that you have this insight, that you've distilled it down to a simple idea, that you always tell your story, and that you stay true to your culture.
Thank you, Robin. This has been fabulous.
Okay. Speak soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.